Greetings and welcome, I'm Ash, and today I think you should try Total War Warhammer, a remarkably good strategy game that also manages to fully capture the insane brilliance of the Warhammer universe. Like any Total War game, it features a variety of different factions, each with their own unique units and gameplay styles, as well as an enormous campaign map full of enemies to conquer and allies to befriend, at least for the time being. So whether you're a fan of the Warhammer universe or strategy games in general, allow me to show you why you should give Total War Warhammer a try. As I've mentioned earlier, the Total War series has always had a variety of factions. However, given that all of the previous games were based on real events from history, the differences between each of the factions were not as large as one might hope for. A certain faction might be better at utilizing cavalry, a different one might specialize in machines of war and prolonged sieges, while another faction entirely might prefer close quarters combat with tight infantry formations. Each of these factions offers a different playstyle, that much is obvious, but at the end of the day, they still use the same types of units, which makes everything feel just a little bit samey. In Total War Warhammer, this is not the case. There are still factions that specialize in certain kinds of warfare. For example, the dwarves prefer a sort of defensive playstyle, but each one brings with it a whole bunch of unique and rather interesting units as well. The dwarves can field mighty siege engines and steampunk gyrocopters to smash the enemy into a pulp. The greenskins have gigantic spiders that can send entire regiments fleeing for their lives. Bretonia has nearly invincible knights hocked up on ancient magic. The wood elves have the best archers the world has ever seen, and the list goes on for quite a while. What this means is that no matter what faction you choose, you're going to have a diverse and intriguing batch of units to play around with. And that is something that goes a long way when it comes to replayability. Another benefit of this system is that it's very easy for new players to get an understanding of how units measure up against each other. The enormous Chaos Giants are obviously stronger than puny infantry. Hordes of warhounds are obviously going to get decimated by charging into entrenched infantry positions, and dwarven quarrelers are obviously going to annihilate swarms of monstrous bats before they even reach them. This might not sound like a big deal now, but when you're still learning Total War Warhammer, subtle hints like these are exactly the type of knowledge you need in order to create powerful and balanced armies. It also helps that Total War Warhammer has nearly perfectly adapted the Warhammer lore, so as you learn more about the story, it'll become easier and easier to understand what each of the factions is all about. The previously mentioned dwarves, for example, are a very proud and sturdy race that is really good to ally with, but should you ever cross them, you are going to end up in a world of trouble. Not only will this sour your relationship with the Dwarven Kingdom, but they will also write your name in the blood of the High King himself into the Great Book of Grudges, where it will remain until they deliver righteous vengeance upon your land. Since dwarf players have to respond to every single slight with bloody violence lest they risk public outrage or even rebellion, it is easy to see why the faction as a whole tends to play defensively. This isn't something that's forced upon you, but rather it's a byproduct of the faction's unique mechanics and lore, which makes it all the more exciting. All of this does not apply to the dwarves alone, it applies to every single one of the factions. While dwarves may be defensive, the brutish greenskins must constantly be aggressive or their armies will turn on each other, which consequently means that their campaign is going to have a vastly different flow from the dwarf one. These changes are not so outlandish that you're going to have to relearn the game every single time you swap a faction, but they are significant enough that there are always new tricks to learn. Besides making each faction more entertaining to play, this sort of design makes multiple playthroughs a lot more enticing, because you're not playing with a slight modification of the race you already know, you are playing as something new. The combination of all these features is exactly why I consider Total War Warhammer to be the very best Total War game to start the series with. It has all of the depth and complexity the Total War games are famous for, but it tempers all of that with smart design choices that gently push you towards the right direction without ever going overboard. Combine this with a variety of factions that each appeal to a different type of player, and you've got yourself a strategy game that is very, very hard to master, but not so hard to just have fun with. However, none of this will be of any relevance if the actual battles, I mean the reason you would even play a Total War game, were not up to snuff. As such, I'm very glad to say that Total War Warhammer has some of the most enjoyable battles the series has ever seen. Due to all of the unit variety and the presence of magic, there is a lot more you can accomplish through pure strategy and trickery, which means that previously unwinnable battles are now suddenly difficult puzzles that can be cracked through sufficient skill and effort. The role unit variety plays in Total War Warhammer cannot be overstated either, because each of the factions requires different types of tactics and compositions to adequately beat. For example, the Beastmen will most likely charge you head on, which means you need a solid line of melee units to protect your squishy backline. While on the opposite side of the coin, the Wood Elves will rain so many arrows upon you, the ground will turn practically black. You can obviously create armies that are almost as good against any sort of enemy composition, but the unit variety goes a long way towards keeping the battles fresh and, most importantly, interesting. Naturally, every game has its flaws, and Total War Warhammer is no exception. While most of the maps are great to mess around with, the sieges are absolutely dreadful and always play out in exactly the same way. All of this comes down to the poorly planned city layouts, but we'll come back to that topic in a little bit. The second major problem I have is the downright brain-dead enemy AI on the campaign map. When it comes to combat, the AI is fully capable of using some decently advanced tactics to defeat you, but when it comes to building up a proper base and fielding a balanced army, it is completely and utterly clueless. It often builds multiple buildings that do the very same thing, ignores any sort of technology that prevents chaos corruption from sweeping through their lands, and best of all, doesn't demolish useless structures in order to recruit the highest tier of units. Things aren't as bad as they sound because the AI on harder difficulties tends to cheat a bit, but it is still not something I'm entirely pleased with, and I really do hope Total War Warhammer 2 will manage to fix it. I mentioned earlier that some of the maps are just a chore to play, and if this was any random AAA game, chances are that would be the end of story. But thankfully, Total War Warhammer has mod support. So if you're like me and you dislike a decent chunk of the vanilla maps, worry not, as there is absolutely nothing preventing you from either editing or replacing them yourself, or just going to the Steam Workshop and downloading versions other people have created. And just like that, one of Total War Warhammer's biggest problems has been fixed. Mod support doesn't just apply to maps, however, it applies to pretty much everything. For example, do you hate it how enemies seem to confederate every few turns? Well, there is a mod to either disable or tone down the frequency of confederations. Or do you maybe feel like the overall balance is out of whack, or that there just aren't enough armies marching across the campaign map? Again, there are multiple mods that fix just that. It might sound silly to focus this much on mod support in what is essentially a recommendation for a strategy game, but the ability to fix potential flaws and personalize the whole experience simply cannot be understated. Much like Skyrim, I've had a great deal of fun with the vanilla version of Total War Warhammer, but it is the creativity of the modding community that will keep me coming back for more over and over again. Total War Warhammer represents a crossover between two franchises I've enjoyed for many years now, and I am absolutely delighted to say that it manages to be faithful to both sides, while also being a pretty damn good game on its own. So if you're up for an absolutely massive strategy game that sports a wide variety of unique factions with their own units and playstyles, then I can heartily recommend you give Total War Warhammer a try. It really is a great game. Thank you guys for watching, and if you enjoyed this, or even if you didn't, please do let me know. And with that said, I hope you guys have a nice day, and I'll see you soon.